In a digital era where marketers can track every click and seemingly attribute every ad dollar, you might be surprised to know that marketing teams are spending millions of dollars a year on a channel that they seemingly can't track at all. One of the oldest advertising channels in existence, the billboard. So, how do marketers know if these massive investments are actually worth it? Here's the question we got at Outperform HQ.
I just returned back from New York City, my first time in the city ever. And I have to say, I was genuinely surprised to see the number of tech companies running billboards in Manhattan. It's not the type of typical, like Times Square advertiser that I would expect. And so, I guess my question is ultimately, how do companies measure the ROI of billboard campaigns like this? I would assume they're fairly expensive, so there has to be some way of determining if they work or not.
That's what we're going to set out to answer today. I'm Ryan Lucht, and you're watching Outperform. So to help us figure this out, I sat down with Greg Dale, who has a pretty interesting background, not only running billboards in the political sphere, but also helping marketing teams at major brands measure the impact of billboards with something called geolift testing. Here's how he explained it. All right, Greg, I want to run a billboard campaign, and I want to know if it's working or not, but obviously I can't A-B test whether or not someone saw the billboard that I'm about to put up. So what do I do instead?
So, being a history major, talking about statistics, I'll scroll back. The way I think about it is the traditional approach is what's called a match market test, which say you can't A/B test, like you said, but maybe you could find a similar region, a similar city, and put the billboards in one city and don't do them in another. So you might say, I want to put my billboards in Chicago. Chicago is a cool market for me, but Milwaukee, maybe I don't. It's a similar market. It's in the Midwest. It's got some size. It's got urban areas and suburban and rural areas. Great. So that's sort of the traditional approach, and you probably get some signal out of that if your billboards are very effective. But also, there's like an incredible amount of key differences between Chicago and Milwaukee. Per capita GDP is very different. The size of the city is very different. There's a cultural element that's different across those two cities. So there's a lot of differences there. And so what we do, which is kind of the bleeding edge of this approach, is called the synthetic control, which is for Chicago. We'll actually go out and take all the other cities in your data and say, if we take every other city and kind of blend them together, what's the right recipe to make other cities behave like Chicago? And that net result might be that it's a third Milwaukee, a third Detroit, and then tons of there's a little bit of LA and a little bit of Miami and a little bit of thing, just enough to get it to be as close to Chicago as we can, and then we're able to compare that actual Chicago with the billboards to that synthetic counterfactual Chicago that could have been that didn't have the billboards, and use that. And of course, this is not a perfect process. It is not a perfect A/B test. It's not an actual Chicago. There's always some error, but TLDR, it drives probably a 3 to 5 times, 4 times reduction in the error bounds around the number that you're looking at. So that what is the cost per incremental sales? What's the effect? Really shrinking the uncertainty around that.
So if we want to truly statistically measure the effectiveness or the incrementality of a billboard campaign, that starts at the planning stage. Like, what are the things we need to take into account before the billboards go up?
The kind of defining thing about billboards out of home is actually like the long lead times that are involved. You have to plan quite ahead to figure out what inventory is going to be available when, make sure you actually are able to secure that inventory, because it's usually like a first come first serve style thing.
Sure.
And often go through a number of revisions with the source. And so what you're doing there is really trying to identify some rough equivalencies in how you plan the inventory buy, to make sure that you're going to buy in some places where you expect to see results, and then consciously not buy in some others. And that often means that, given the nature of a billboard, they're often high traffic locations. People are moving around a lot, and so you want to make sure that you have enough separation physically, geographically, that you don't have people traversing from an area that you expect to treat with these billboards, to one that you don't. Like a lot of software companies end up buying billboards on the 101 in San Francisco, where people are literally traveling between cities, and so that means that you really want to zoom out and use something like a DMA to plan your campaign around.
If we have the luxury of being extremely intentional with the markets that we're buying in or not, how do you approach that? Like, should you be doing some experiment design for a geolift test ahead of placing the buy, or do we have flexibility to sort of figure out the markets that we want to compare to after we've figured out where billboards
Yeah,
are going to run?
yeah. This time you don't have the flexibility to figure it out. Oftentimes, you could if you were only really buying in one location, but you also have to think about the dynamics of businesses. A few things to unwind here. So if you just keep that example of like a software company, since we're a SaaS company, like selling billboards, a lot of them kind of compete for literally the same inventory that's in Soma and San Francisco on the 101, maybe like in New York, in New York City, and so you have a lot of confounding there because the place where your buyers are already is the place that you're buying the billboard. And so then it's going to be very hard to disentangle, which was the billboards or was it the latent demand there? So um, planning ahead helps figure that out. If you really, do want to buy um, inventory to advertise your software company, like maybe San Francisco isn't the place to test it. Maybe you want to take some other mid-sized markets, test it there, and then use some other mid-sized markets and compare the results there. And so with our geolift approach, use a synthetic control that's modeled by the actual behavior of those said mid-sized markets to be able to pick some tested controls that are evenly balanced on their population characteristics, like how many buyers do you have there, how many customers do you have there already, what kind of behavior have they shown in the past towards your product or service, and use those to balance the two groups. But yeah, flying blind means you have a really hard time disentangling what's what, and that means it's going to be kind of a measurement mess.
Okay, so we have to plan markets in advance. Once we have the market matching, like what does actual experiment design look like for a billboard campaign? Like obviously with digital ad channels, it's easy for us to go dark in certain places, or maybe even to spend more in certain areas
Mm-hmm.
and compare like doubling our spend in some geos versus consistent. Is that true of billboard campaigns too, or like what do the actual treatments become?
Yeah, the all that is true, except that you got to plan ahead. With digital ads, you can turn them off and turn them back on whenever you want. But like that long lead time with billboards, the actual fact that somebody's driving out with a truck and going to paint it over means that you need to make sure your plan is set. And so, going through that planning process to model that past behavior, identify comparable markets. So whether you have two groups of markets, treatment and a control, or you have maybe two different treatments, like you mentioned, of going, maybe up in the amount of money that you're spending or TRPs that you're buying. You just really want to have that figured out ahead of time, and so that when that buy goes out, that exactly what's happening.
And I imagine that the longer time frame is true not just of the lead time, but also for observing effects once the billboards go up, right? We
Yeah.
wouldn't expect them to be quite as immediate in their impact as a meta ad.
Yes, what us nerds call ad stock, the decay and accumulation effects of an ad. If it's a meta ad, it's something that it's scrolling by in your feed really fast. If you didn't see it, you probably didn't see it. Same thing with a paid search ad. It's there. You're going to click, and if you're not, you probably didn't pay a ton of attention to it. With something like a billboard or even things like linear television, direct mail, that's often, if that billboard's on the 101, you might see that every few days as you drive up and down that highway, and it does actually kind of burn in over time. It take time for those effects to show up. So that's part of the planning process, like you mentioned, to incorporate that kind of burn-in effect and time range to get to full strength, and then letting that settle, and then knowing actually if the campaign's going to come down to model it on the reverse end as it comes back from like being at a certain intensity level and returning back to normal. So, one of the fun nerdy things about the GLF product that we're working on is modeling all that stuff. And if you're using that, you can go ahead and have it incorporated. But if you're not, probably it's about setting out clear times of like, okay, these billboards going up on the 5th of the month. We're really going to be expecting full strength to hit by, the 10th, and give it, 3 or 4 weeks afterwards to fully, have its effect in the market.
So, in your experience, what's been the total time frame from billboards going up to, we're concluding our data collection and analyzing the experiment?
Yeah, it's something that's very unfortunately, a lot of things, it depends. It's like I hate, have a pithy answer, but the pithy answer is it depends. So if it's, you can also think about like one angle is what's the intensity of that buy? What is it actually asking you to do? If it's like, go get a demo of my thing or go buy my product or there's tickets available now, you would hope that like that action would take place in a matter of weeks. If it's sort of a slower burn, longer consideration product, you may be looking at like a couple months to really see that effect. But you can also monitor things like, depending on how punchy your message is, like earned media, see if there's social mentions. That's oftentimes, I think nowadays, what a lot of folks are trying to hit with their out of home message is, that something very punchy that breaks through, and you have you know either reporters or people online talking about it.
So, what's the hardest part of this whole process, or like what's the reason that advertisers reach for something like Eppo's GeoLift product to get this done?
The core stats, the reason, the hardest part of measurement here is figuring out what's noise and what's signal from what's very broad pieces of data. All of San Francisco. What are the sales in all of San Francisco? All of Los Angeles, all of Milwaukee, Chicago, Anchorage. Your intervention, your program, your campaign really has to have like a noticeable effect, and that goes back to like, what are you asking it to do? What's the consideration cycle? Um, how quick is the channel? And so all of that means that you need to apply a lot of fancy statistics to tease out that signal, because there's quite a lot of noise. There's so many things that go into what a market's performance is, like literally weather, natural disasters, competition, other people in the market. And so you're looking for these trends that you want to confidently say are there, because oftentimes if you run a test and it comes back positively, you might be spending millions and millions of dollars behind that result. And so you really want to walk into that ask for the budget, that decision armed with the best information. So we take a lot of pride and put a lot of effort into making sure that when we do like a GLIF model, that the statistics are correct, which lead to customers having an accurate view of what we think the effect was, and also like what the upper and lower bounds on that effect is. It's not just billboards were good, they generated 10 sales. It's often, in reality, maybe it's 5 to 12 sales, and you're saying, I'm pretty darn sure these billboards were positive, but the range of positive, how good, could really vary. And that's an important part of how we decide how much money to spend on them going forward.
Yeah. And anytime I hear, like that the work isn't separating the signal from the noise, I of course think about sample size considerations, or just how much data do we have to work with. I guess, what are
Mm-hmm.
some of the determining factors that will let me say this again. What are some of the factors that determine whether or not running a GeoLift test is feasible for my scale campaign?
Yeah, there's a bunch of stuff. It depends. So, like the sensitivity of the metrics. So, if you're not advertising very much in a market and you have a quick consideration, inexpensive product, if you start advertising and people want your thing, it should work pretty fast. So, if you put up your very first out of home campaign with a product that no one's ever heard of, like that should have an effect, and it should be pretty clear to see that happening. And maybe need fewer statistical heroics in that case. If you have a very saturated product, if it's a niche product, if it's something that you're trying to break out of its, break out of its shell, that is where you're going to have, probably a harder time moving the needle. And that's where all you need the tricks and the planning really to come through. So a lot of levers that end up going into that are things like the time. So how long has the experiment been running? Taking a look at those burn-in effects, both at the beginning and the end of the experiment. When we say sample size in geo world, that's often number of regions like DMAs or commuting zones, or number of countries that you include as well. And so one of the tricky things about those is they're inherently unequal. You might have Chicago alongside Anchorage in an extreme example, and kind of figuring out, making sure the treatment groups are balanced, so you can have small, medium, and large markets to look at are important. So yeah, the size of the geographies, the kind of baseline sales activity or baseline metric is important, and then time is another key consideration. So in our world, we end up simulating all of our experiments before we launch them, using those kind of real life characteristics. We take the real metric, we take the proposed regions, we take the actual behavior of things and amount of time, and sort of figuring, okay, well, if everything going forward is behaving roughly like it has in the past, then you would expect to see anything greater than a 4 or 5% move in sales. And that gives customers kind of a good idea of like, will I get something out of this test? And the fun thing about marketing is that oftentimes that minimum deductible effect, that like we can see that minimum 4 or 5%. If you're below that, it's kind of the same as zero oftentimes. So it's like, that's like a thing that we can play into our advantage a little bit.
So GeoLift can help companies measure major billboard campaigns across multiple cities. But what if you're a smaller business or brand just starting out and only running your billboard campaign in one or two places? Head of Marketing Elizabeth George has a couple thoughts that might help you out. All right, so Elizabeth, you've run billboards in a startup environment before, maybe just in one city at a time, but just campaigns that aren't quite big enough to be measured with a statistical approach like what Epo GeoLift does. So if that's the stage you're at in running a billboard campaign, how do you measure success?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. Measuring success when you don't have that volume doesn't mean you don't try to measure it, at least. So I've run a few billboard campaigns in the past, both at like Series B, Series C companies. And it's really about a brand awareness play. We just need to get our name out there beyond our known market. And so first and foremost, we're looking at probably two measures that we're going to do right off the bat. One of them is how did you hear from us built into the sales process. Anyone who's in marketing knows like attribution cannot be as subjective as that. People come into the pipe thinking it's because of one reason or the other, but it's probably due to the primary attribution. So when they come in, it's more salespeople talk to them. They'll ask this as like an enforcement piece. The more like if it's billboard, it'll be selected. It could be just plain text enter to be like, oh, it's billboard, but they think online, which would match more with the digital component to it. Or yeah, like I've been driving around the city, I've seen it a lot. And so that'll be plugged in there. At the end of the quarter, or even as you're continuing on, you can tell how much influence like these billboards can have. Maybe not as a primary attribution, but as like that influence. Yeah. And then there's the other piece, which is potentially looking at like the lift and the market. So if we're targeting a specific city, is there an increase in traffic in that area? Are we seeing an increase in brand search from that area? Just something that can give off that success metric.
Sure. And Greg mentioned this a bit too, but I imagine it's especially true in these smaller scale environments. Like the end goal is never just the billboard itself, right? Like you're supporting this on other channels that are maybe more inherently measurable, or you're trying to do an earned media push with the billboards too.
Yeah. One thing that stuck up to me when we did our last campaign at my former company
was someone had written in being like, I don't know if I saw your billboard or saw a picture of your billboard. And that's just when you know that you've combined your digital and real world campaigns together really successfully. So we did, of course, pair this with a heavy online presence of actual photos of our billboard, with the campaign slogans, with outbound messaging that aligned with it. We brought all these together so we could clearly track the digital footprint. But that like subjective piece of actually someone coming online after seeing it was the more subjective piece.
I guess outside of the incrementality of an entire campaign, do you have any tips on comparing billboards to each other, like trying to figure out what messaging or positioning is most successful?
Yeah, that's tough. I think it's going to go down to impression size. I actually go on site to take a look at them all after they've been put up. It's really exciting when you're working technology to see something tangible come out of what you're doing. So yeah, I've gone to go see every billboard that's been created. And you can kind of get a feel for it, like, wow, it's on this highway, but there wasn't much traffic. So it's not like we're stopping much. So I really want to go for like those high traffic, low speed areas. And you kind of won't get that until you really see it for yourself. The companies can, of course, assist you. Like if you want like a way off the highway and you're like, that one gets backed up a lot, people have more room to pay attention to something. They can help you find those. But yeah, it's really just feet on the ground, trusting your vendors, and figuring out like what's best for your message.
So that should about have us covered, whether you're running your very first billboards or running major campaigns every year. And if you are running billboards in more than one city, take a look at Eppo GeoLift. It's our software tool that makes it really easy for teams to plan, run, and analyze those GeoLift incrementality tests so you can find out if billboards are actually contributing to your bottom line. If you want to read more about any of these topics, you can always find the Outperform blog at geteppo.com/outperform. That's geteppo.com/outperform. Subscribe here on YouTube so you don't miss future episodes. And until next time, I'm Ryan Lucht, and this is Outperform. Keep experimenting.